Take a look around the room. Take a look at your friends. Think about your family. 1 in 27 of you will enjoy the company of small children. That chance rises exponentially if you are white. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Jane Austen opens Pride and Prejudice with a sentence that sounds confident and factual, but is actually filled with sarcasm. From the very first line, Austen signals that this novel is not simply about romance, but about a society that prioritizes wealth, marriage, and reputation over genuine happiness and moral character. While the novel is often remembered as a love story, Austen is far more interested in how people judge one another, and how often those judgments are wrong. Characters confuse confidence with goodness, charm with honesty, and social rank with personal worth. What makes Pride and Prejudice enduring is that these behaviors are still recognizable today. People continue to rely on first impressions, assume popularity equals virtue, and resist admitting when they're wrong. Austen uses humor and irony to make us laugh at these habits, but also forces us to reflect on them. Through Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, Austen argues that true maturity, and therefore true love, only comes after self-awareness and humility.
Jane Austen was born in 1775 and died in 1817, living during a time when women had limited legal rights and almost no financial independence. Austen never married and relied heavily on her family for support throughout her life. This reality strongly influenced her writing. Austen understood that marriage was not only emotional, but deeply practical. For many women, marriage was the only way to avoid financial instability or social decline. This tension appears throughout Pride and Prejudice, especially in the pressure placed on the Bennet sisters to marry well. Austen's major works include Sense and Sensibility, Emma, Mansfield Park, and Persuasion. In each of these novels, she examines how social expectations shape personal choices. It is also important to note that Austen published her novels anonymously during her lifetime. This reflects the limited authority women were given in the literary world. Rather than openly criticizing society, Austen adopts a subtle approach, using irony, dialogue, and character development to expose hypocrisy. Her restraint makes her criticism more powerful, not less.
Pride and Prejudice is set in Regency England, a society governed by rigid class divisions and strict inheritance laws. Wealth was closely tied to land ownership, and women were often excluded from inheriting property. The Bennet family's home, Longbourn, is entailed, meaning it must pass on to a male heir. This legal detail explains much of the novel's tension. Mrs. Bennet's obsession with marriage isn't just a shallow personality trait, but it's rooted in fear of financial insecurity. During this time period, reputation functioned as social currency, especially for women. A single scandal could permanently damage a family's standing. Lydia's elopement threatens not just her own future, but the respectability of all the Bennet sisters. Characters like Lady Catherine represent those in power. She believes her social rank gives her moral authority. Austen uses Lady Catherine to criticize the idea that status equals virtue, showing instead that power often protects arrogance rather than integrity. Although Pride and Prejudice does not reference specific wars directly, it was written during the Napoleonic Wars, a time of political instability and national anxiety in England. This helps explain the novel's focus on stability, order, and social hierarchy. In terms of art and music, the Regency period favored balance, structure, and refinement. These values appear in Austen's writing style, which avoids chaos and exaggeration. Just as Regency art emphasized proportion and harmony, Austen emphasizes social balance and moral restraint. By placing her story in a familiar domestic world rather than on battlefields, Austen shows how large historical pressures shape everyday life, especially for women.
Pride and Prejudice was written during the rise of Romanticism, a literary movement that emphasized emotion, individuality, and personal growth. However, Austen does not fully embrace romantic ideals. Instead, she questions them. Elizabeth trusts her emotional reactions too quickly, assuming her feelings reflect truth. Darcy, on the other hand, suppresses emotion entirely, believing restraint equals superiority. Both extremes create misunderstanding and conflict. Austen suggests that emotional honesty must be balanced with reflection. Growth does not come from dramatic gestures, but uncomfortable self-examination. This makes Austen's interpretation of Romanticism more grounded and realistic. While Romantic poets like Wordsworth celebrated emotional intensity, Austen focuses on everyday interactions. Her characters grow not through dramatic revelation, but through slow recognition of their own flaws. Austen's work also represents a rejection of excessive emotionalism and idealized romance often associated with Romanticism. Instead, she favors restraint, realism, and moral reflection, showing that emotion must be guided by judgment.
Pride and Prejudice, setting is not just background, it reflects character and values. Longbourn, the Bennet family home, is often described through moments of noise, awkwardness, and social embarrassment. Conversations there tend to be rushed or careless, much like the Bennet family's public behavior. In contrast, Pemberley, Darcy's estate, is described as orderly, calm, and natural rather than flashy. When Elizabeth visits Pemberley, she notices that it is impressive without being excessive. This moment is important because it forces her to reconsider Darcy. The setting mirrors his character as reserved, principled, and more thoughtful than she originally believed. Austen uses these places to show how environment reflects inner character, helping readers reassess earlier judgments alongside Elizabeth. Elizabeth Bennet forms a strong negative opinion of Mr. Darcy based on pride, wounded feelings, and misleading appearances. As misunderstandings are slowly corrected, both Elizabeth and Darcy are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. The novel concludes with relationships based on humility, self-awareness, and mutual respect rather than first impressions. The most important conflict in Pride and Prejudice is internal, not external. Elizabeth struggles against her own prejudice, her confidence in her ability to judge others quickly and accurately. Darcy struggles against pride, his belief that emotional restraint and social rank justify emotional distance. Elizabeth Bennet believes she is perceptive and fair-minded, but her confidence becomes a weakness. After reading Darcy's letter, she admits, quote, "Till this moment, I never knew myself," unquote. This line marks a major turning point in the novel. Elizabeth realizes that her intelligence does not make her immune to bias. Austen presents this realization as true maturity, the ability to accept fault without defensiveness. Darcy's development follows a similar path. Early in the novel, his pride causes himself to appear cold and dismissive. However, instead of defending himself, Darcy changes his behavior. His decision to quietly resolve Lydia's scandal without expecting praise shows that his growth is internal, not performative. When Darcy reflects on his behavior, he admits that he was, quote, given good principles, but left to follow them in pride and conceit, unquote. This moment shows Darcy's awareness that moral values mean nothing without humility, reinforcing Austen's belief that character is proven through self-correction. Together, Elizabeth and Darcy demonstrate that real change is shown through action, not words. Austen suggests that intelligence alone is not enough. Elizabeth's sharp mind initially leads her to quick judgments. True growth only begins when she questions her own certainty. This theme reflects a broader message about the human condition. People often trust their own perspective too much. Austen reminds readers that growth requires humility and the willingness to be uncomfortable. Marriage in Pride and Prejudice is a romantic fantasy. It is moral evidence. Lydia's marriage reflects impulsiveness and irresponsibility. Charlotte's marriage reflects practicality without emotional fulfillment. Elizabeth and Darcy's marriage succeeds because it is based on respect, honesty, and personal change. Austen argues that healthy relationships depend on character, not convenience or desire.
Jane Austen's style is subtle but powerful. She relies heavily on irony, dialogue, and controlled narration rather than emotional exaggeration. Characters reveal themselves through conversation, manners, and small choices. One of Austen's most important techniques is free, indirect discourse, which blends Elizabeth's thoughts with the narrator's voice. This allows readers to experience Elizabeth's mistaken judgment firsthand before realizing the truth. This technique is effective because it forces readers to reflect on their own thinking. We, like Elizabeth, feel confident and then realize we were wrong. Austen's style teaches through experience rather than instruction. While many romantic writers favored emotional intensity and dramatic expression, Austen's style is more restrained and ironic. This difference allows her to critique society quietly rather than emotionally, making her work more analytical than expressive compared to other romantic authors.
Literary devices. Irony. Irony is central to Austen's critique. The novel opens with irony, and it continues throughout. Statements that seem sincere often reveal deeper criticism of social values. For example, when Austen describes Mr. Collins as a, quote, a mixture of pride and obsequiousness, unquote, the irony exposes how social ambition replaces sincerity. Foil. Charlotte Lucas acts as the foil to Elizabeth. When Charlotte explains her view of marriage, she says, quote, happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance, unquote. She later adds that it is better to know as little as possible about one's future spouse to avoid disappointment. Charlotte's practical view of marriage highlights Elizabeth's belief in emotional and moral compatibility. Their contrast helps clarify the novel's central values. Symbolism. Letters symbolize truth and self-examination. After reading Darcy's letter, Elizabeth reflects, quote, she grew absolutely ashamed of herself, unquote. She later admits, quote, till this moment, I never knew myself, unquote. Darcy's letter functions as a moment of moral clarity, forcing Elizabeth to confront her own prejudice and reconsider past assumptions. These devices are not decorative. They guide the reader's moral understanding.
Many literary critics argue that Elizabeth's confidence in her judgment delays her growth. Her intelligence initially reinforces her pride, making self-reflection difficult. Literary scholar Claudia L. Johnson observes that Austen presents this process of moral development as deeply uncomfortable. Her heroines must experience self-knowledge through error and humiliation rather than through romantic reward. In contrast, critic Marilyn Butler argues that Austen's novel reinforces social stability by rewarding characters who adapt to existing structures rather than rejecting them. While Johnson emphasizes personal growth, Butler focuses on social harmony. Together, these interpretations show how Austen balances individual change with social order, allowing the novel to function both as a romance and a moral critique. Austen does not portray growth as easy or graceful. Instead, change is triggered by embarrassment, self-doubt, and reflection. Another critical perspective comes from D.W. Harding, who famously argues that Austen's novels are not gentle comedies, but sharp social critiques disguised as polite fiction. Harding suggests that Austen uses irony to expose the selfishness and moral blindness of polite society, especially among the upper classes. From this perspective, Elizabeth's early prejudice is not just a personal flaw, but a learned response to a society that rewards charm and status over honesty. In contrast, Alastair Duckworth focuses on the idea of moral balance and social responsibility. Duckworth argues that Austen ultimately values reform over rebellion. Characters like Darcy are not punished for belonging to the upper class, but for failing to act responsibly with it. His eventual moral growth, especially his handling of Lydia's scandal, represents Austen's belief that social systems can function ethically only when individuals act with integrity. This interpretation supports Austen's larger claim. Moral growth is earned through humility, not confidence. Together, these critics show that Pride and Prejudice operates on two levels. It criticizes social hypocrisy while still affirming the possibility of moral improvement. Austen does not reject society entirely, but challenges individuals to behave better within it.
Conclusion. Ultimately meaningful because it is built on honesty, reflection, and mutual respect. Austen leaves readers with a quiet but powerful message. True maturity begins when we question our own assumptions. That insight, more than the romance, is what has kept Pride and Prejudice relevant for over 2 centuries.